I'm sorry, but you can't be in here, my cousin Olivia's voice oozed with undisguised contempt as she looked me up and down. This is the VIP area. Do you have any idea how much the entry fee alone costs? My name is Jessica, I'm 27, and in the eyes of my family, I seem to be forever stuck in the role of the poor relative. I ignored her jab, gracing her with an icy calm, and took a step forward toward the soft light of the private booths. But for Olivia, this was too much. Her face contorted into a mask of rage, and she shrieked, desperately summoning the imposing security guard by the velvet rope. "Sir! Get this girl out of here. She's making a scene and ruining our evening." The man in the impeccable suit didn't even flinch. His gaze slid over the enraged Olivia, then settled on me, a flicker of respect in his eyes. And then he spoke 5 words that made my cousin's world crack and crumble to dust. "Ma'am, she owns this establishment." Does that feeling sound familiar? When the people closest to you look at you but only see their own prejudices? If you've had a similar moment in your life, let me know in the comments. And be sure to stay with me, because it only gets more interesting from here. For now, let me rewind the tape and tell you how it came to be that I, the girl who was considered a nobody her whole life, became the owner of the most prestigious private club in Los Angeles, right under the noses of my family, who were still convinced I couldn't even afford a cup of coffee in this place. For years ago, the world I grew up in was destroyed. My mother's empire, a thriving development business that was changing the face of Los Angeles, didn't collapse gradually. It was wiped off the map almost overnight. One day, my mother was a titan of commerce, a woman whose name opened any door. The next, the only visitors in her office were federal agents, silently carrying out her life packed in cardboard boxes. Almost immediately, unpleasant rumors began to crawl through our large family, passed from one luxurious home to another. Bad deals, they said. Projects that were too risky. Some even dared to whisper the word fraud. None of it was true. But in our world, appearances were always more important than facts, and this lie triggered a chain reaction that rippled through the hills of California. And as soon as the rumors were accepted as truth, the inevitable happened. The phone went silent. Invitations to holidays and charity galas stopped arriving. Suddenly, all those aunts, uncles, and cousins who used to fight for my mother's attention at family gatherings were too busy to even answer a text message. My uncle Arthur, who just 2 years earlier had tearfully thanked my mother for a $60,000 check that allowed him to give his daughter a fairy tale wedding, now pretended our surname was completely foreign to him. The speed with which they all turned their backs on us would have been admirable if it weren't so cruel. The fact is, they all operated on one simple assumption: we were left with nothing. And in that, they made a fatal mistake. While the foundation of my mother's world was cracking at the seams, I had already been building my own for 4 years. I graduated from Harvard with a degree in computer science at 23, but the idea for my company was planted much earlier, in my dorm room between lectures and sleepless nights. I developed complex data analysis algorithms for financial giants. By the fateful moment my mother's empire collapsed, my creation was already generating a multi-million-dollar annual revenue. And here was the bitter irony. Not a single person in our large and once close family even bothered to ask how we were really doing. In their minds, our entire family had been written off. They simply turned the page, as if the chapter about us in the family history had never existed. My mother, accustomed to being the benefactor, was too humiliated to admit that it was now her daughter silently paying all the bills. My father was too proud to hint to anyone that I had become the quiet pillar of our family. And me? I watched it all from the sidelines, silently. I was making a mental list, noting who considered the word family to be more than just a convenience in good times. Last month, my financial advisor placed a folder on my desk with what he called a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Crestwood Valley Private Club was for sale. Its elderly owners were retiring, and their spoiled heirs showed no interest in managing such a complex business. The numbers spoke for themselves: 265 acres of prime land in the heart of the Los Angeles hills, a championship golf course where multi-million-dollar deals were closed, and an established clientele from the very top of the city's elite. From a business perspective, it was a flawless investment. So I did what I always do when I see a good deal: I bought it all. The deal was closed in 5 days, paid for entirely in cash. On paper, it was just a cold, calculated business strategy. No emotions involved. That's what I thought until last night. And then I saw something in our family group chat. Oh, yes. That chat. They never removed me from it. Apparently, in their rush to erase us from their real lives, they completely forgot about our digital existence. And there it was, a message glowing on my phone screen. Grandpa Edward's 80th birthday celebration will be held tomorrow evening. Venue: Crestwood Valley Private Club. The irony was so exquisite I could practically taste its sweetness. The very relatives who had treated us like invisible ghosts for the past 4 years were now going to raise a glass to Grandpa's health in my establishment. They had no idea who actually owned every inch of this land, every glass of champagne they were about to drink. I couldn't deny myself the pleasure of being there in person. To see their faces the moment they realized just how deeply they had misjudged us. Misjudged their ruined relatives. So, the decision was made. I would make an appearance at their little family celebration. Sometimes, life hands you the perfect opportunity for a quiet triumph, and it would be simply rude not to take it. The main hall of the Crestwood Valley Club was the epitome of understated Los Angeles luxury, the complete opposite of how I remembered it. Instead of heavy chandeliers, there was soft, diffused light pouring from hidden alcoves. Instead of dark wood paneling, the walls were finished with polished Italian travertine, cold to the eye but fabulously expensive. And, of course, the main attraction, a panoramic wall of solid glass offering a breathtaking view of the city sinking into the golden-purple rays of sunset. As a child, this place had seemed cold and inaccessible. It was built to make anyone who didn't belong to this world feel like an outsider. Now, I owned it. And that meant I could appreciate this whole carefully crafted production from the perspective of a director, not just a spectator who was once denied a ticket. I didn't have to look for them long. They had, of course, taken the best table, at the very edge of the terrace, with a panoramic view of the 7th hole. Below, on the impeccably manicured lawn, men in expensive polos were closing deals far more important than their golf scores. Grandpa Edward sat at the head of the table like a patriarch receiving tribute from his court. My Aunt Beatrice was examining the bubbles in her champagne glass with the air of a connoisseur, as if searching for a flaw. Uncle Arthur was loudly telling some story, waving his arms with such drama he might as well have been on stage, while everyone else laughed with the exaggerated enthusiasm of people desperately trying to prove, mostly to themselves, that they were having a wonderful time. They looked serene. Happy. Utterly unburdened by thoughts of their ruined relatives. The complete absence of guilt on their faces was almost a work of art. These people had perfected the skill of erasing inconvenient chapters from the family chronicle. Especially the chapters that featured us. The first to notice me was, of course, Olivia. A whole gamut of emotions flickered across her face in fast motion. First, mild confusion, quickly replaced by open irritation, and then by poorly concealed panic. She leaned over and hissed something short and venomous to her mother, Aunt Beatrice, who spun around and locked eyes with me, her gaze filled with such horror it was as if she'd seen the ghost of her bankrupt past. The news spread across the table like a spark on dry tinder. Each reaction was more dramatic than the last. Uncle Arthur froze mid-sentence, his wine glass never reaching its destination. My cousin Ethan theatrically pressed a hand to his forehead, as if the mere sight of me had brought on a splitting migraine. The whole scene was like a poorly rehearsed play. Except none of them had ever been good actors, unless the role required cold indifference. Well, Grandpa Edward's voice cut through the rising whispers with an icy authority that instantly commanded any space. What a surprise. I slowly approached their table, each step echoing in the suspended silence. I tried to make my smile look casual and polite, rather than reflecting the sense of quiet, intoxicating triumph that was spreading warmly through my chest. Happy 80th, Grandpa. You look wonderful. Thank you, my dear, he replied, in a tone one might use to acknowledge receipt of a business email. I must admit, your appearance is quite a surprise. I noticed, I said, my gaze sweeping over the empty chairs they had prudently left at their massive table, a perfect physical barrier between them and the rest of the world. Though, it seems there's more than enough room here. Aunt Beatrice interjected, clearing her throat with the condescending softness of a flight attendant explaining to an economy-class passenger why his seat isn't in first class. Jessica, dear, her voice was laced with false sympathy, perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. You see, this is a very private event. For family only. Those words hung in the air, cold and heavy as a marble slab. For family only. As if 27 years of shared holidays, birthdays, and graduations were just an unfortunate misunderstanding. As if blood relation had an unspoken expiration date, directly dependent on the state of your bank account. I see, I said, nodding slowly, my eyes moving deliberately around the table, lingering on each face as if I were entering them into my personal ledger. Family only. Uncle Arthur shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his perfect silk tie suddenly feeling too tight. It's not personal, Jessica, you understand. It's just circumstances. We just thought it would be easier for everyone. Easier for whom? For us? Olivia chimed in, her voice taking on that polished, condescending tone that was the hallmark of her elite private school education, the art of belittling without raising your voice. Let's be honest, Jessica. You're barely making ends meet, let alone being able to afford dinner at a place like this. Your presence here is just awkward. For all of us. And that's when I smiled. It wasn't the polite, strained smile they were used to seeing. It was a slow, confident smile, the kind that freezes the self-satisfaction on the faces of people on the other side of the table. You're absolutely right, Olivia. This would all be terribly awkward if it were true. Grandpa Edward's eyes, usually calm and authoritative, narrowed into two sharp slits. A look that didn't ask, but demanded an explanation. What are you trying to say? Oh, no need to apologize. Everyone makes mistakes. With deliberate slowness, I took my phone out of my purse. At that moment, absolute silence fell over the table. Everyone froze. Uncle Arthur lowered his glass without taking a sip. Aunt Beatrice stopped breathing. All eyes were fixed on my hand as it slowly swiped across the screen. Funny you should mention money. I just closed a rather large deal this week on a new property acquisition. The silence that descended upon the terrace was so thick you could touch it. For the first time all evening, I heard the clink of ice in a glass somewhere in the distance. I heard the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Everyone was frozen like wax figures in a museum, afraid to break the tension. The only movement was the reflection of the setting sun on Aunt Beatrice's diamond bracelet as her hand hung listlessly over the table. What property? Ethan asked, a note of alarm in his voice that he tried in vain to mask with indifference. Oh, nothing special. Just a little place with good potential, I replied, my gaze sweeping over the immaculate gardens around us. 265 acres, a championship golf course, and a clubhouse with a rather interesting history dating back to the golden age of Hollywood. I paused, savoring the moment, letting them put two and two together themselves. I watched their faces with the keen attention of a scientist who has mixed two incompatible reagents and is now waiting for the inevitable explosion. I think you know it. It's called Crestwood Valley. The champagne flute froze in Olivia's hand, so still it was as if time had stopped around it. Her perfectly painted lips were parted, ready for a sip that was never taken. Uncle Arthur, a man who always had a story or a joke at the ready, looked as if all the air had been let out of him. His mouth opened and closed silently, but no words came out. But the most eloquent silence was Grandpa Edwards. The man who had controlled family assets, scandals, and fortunes for half a century looked genuinely lost for the first time in my life. "That's impossible," Olivia whispered, her voice so quiet it was nearly carried away by the afternoon breeze rustling through the impeccably manicured gardens. "Is it?" I replied, slipping my phone back into my purse with a light, almost bored motion. The previous owners, you know, were very keen on their baby falling into the right hands. The color drained from their faces so rapidly that for a moment I thought one of them might need medical attention. This scene was even better than I could have imagined. And I had imagined it in vivid detail. The air was thick with the collision of two realities, the one they had lived in for the past 4 years, and the one that was real. Watching their meticulously ordered world crumble under the weight of my success was almost physically painful. For them, of course. Jessica. Uncle Arthur was the first to find his voice, though it came out a few tones higher than usual, as if he were short of breath. We had no idea. About your business. Of course, you didn't, I replied in the same light, almost conversational tone, as if we were discussing the weather and not their catastrophic failure in assessing my financial situation. You never asked. For years of complete silence doesn't usually foster an exchange of news. Now, wait a minute. Aunt Beatrice slammed her glass on the table with such force that expensive champagne splashed onto the white tablecloth. A golden stain slowly spread across the fabric, a perfect symbol of their tarnished reputation. We were just giving you space. We didn't want to impose after all of your mother's difficulties. We thought it would be tactless. How generous. My voice was dripping with artificial sweetness, but there was a clear undercurrent of bitterness. I'm sure it had nothing to do with my mother's financial troubles. And certainly not with your panic that we might ruin your reputation at social gatherings. Grandpa Edward leaned forward, and his diamond tie pin caught a ray of the setting sun, sending a cold, rainbow-colored glint across the table, making the moment even more surreal. Jessica, there's no need to complicate things. Every family has periods of quiet. Quiet? I said the word as if it were made of glass and ash, afraid it might shatter on my tongue. Is that what we're calling complete oblivion now? Because I have a very different definition for it. The air on the terrace grew dense, hard to breathe. My cousins exchanged panicked, silent glances like accomplices whose secret had just been exposed. Their parents, on the other hand, were desperately searching for an escape route, any excuse to get up and leave, preserving at least the semblance of control. But it was too late. Their ship, named Dignity, hadn't just sprung a leak. It was already lying at the bottom of the ocean, and all they could do was watch the air bubbles rise to the surface. Ethan, who had been silently observing the scene until now, decided to take on the role of peacemaker, a role he apparently often played in this family. Look, Jessica, maybe we just misunderstood each other. Oh, there was no misunderstanding, I interrupted him, my voice cold and even. I gestured around the table as if summarizing a long and unpleasant list. You made it perfectly clear where I stand. Today just put a fine point on it. The shock on Olivia's face began to give way to anger. Her cheeks flushed with that same crimson blush that always appeared when she realized she was losing control. You seriously think we're going to believe you own this place? The last we heard about you, you were working on some app and living in an apartment the size of a closet. The last you heard was 4 years ago, Olivia. The world doesn't stand still just because you're not paying attention. And I smiled at her again. The same smile that had made her flinch since we were children, arguing over the last piece of birthday cake. Some of us change and grow. Others prefer to live in a world of their own assumptions. The mounting tension finally reached its boiling point. Olivia, her face burning with humiliation and rage, could no longer contain herself. Noticing a tall, distinguished man in uniform standing at the entrance to the terrace, she saw her chance to regain control. She shot to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Sir," her voice rose to a piercing shriek, causing several neighboring tables to turn. "Get this girl out of here. She's making a scene and ruining the evening for all of us." The man, the very Mr. Hendricks, head of security, calmly made his way to their table. He approached and stopped, his gaze resting calmly on Olivia, who had summoned him. "Ma'am, you called for me?" he asked in a steady, professional tone. "Yes." Olivia exhaled, triumphant. "This woman is not a member of the club. Please escort her to the exit." Mr. Hendricks listened to her without changing his expression. Then, slowly, with a deliberate movement, he turned to me. And in that moment, his entire posture changed. The official austerity vanished, replaced by a deep, genuine respect. "Miss Jessica, good evening." His voice was just as steady, but now it held distinct notes of warmth. "I apologize for the disturbance. I hope your guests are behaving themselves?" That simple word, guests, rang out on the terrace like a gunshot. It instantly shattered the fragile social construct they had been living in for the past 4 years. In a single moment, they were no longer in charge. They were my guests. In my club. In the very place they believed I couldn't enter without embarrassing them by my mere presence. "Actually, Mr. Hendricks," I replied, maintaining my composure, "I'm afraid there's been a slight misunderstanding regarding the seating arrangements and, shall we say, general expectations." "Of course, Miss Jessica. Shall I have the staff bring additional chairs for your party?" "That won't be necessary." I spoke softly, watching as the consequences of this short exchange registered on my relatives' faces, one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. "But perhaps you could clarify the current ownership situation for my relatives. It seems they're operating on somewhat outdated information." Mr. Hendricks slowly turned to the table. His face remained completely impassive. It was the face of a man used to delivering bad news to powerful people who weren't accustomed to hearing it. "Certainly. As of last month, the Crestwood Valley Private Club is under new ownership. Consequently, all previous memberships have been temporarily suspended pending review and reapplication to the new management." The blood drained from Uncle Arthur's face. He looked as if he had just heard news of a stock market crash. "Suspended? All memberships?" "Yes, sir. Official letters explaining the transition process have been sent to all former members. The new owner intends to uphold the exclusive standards of the establishment by ensuring that all members share its updated values and principles." Mr. Hendricks delivered this with such impeccable neutrality that I wanted to give him a bonus on the spot. Olivia clutched her mother's arm with such force it was as if the ground was giving way beneath her. "Mom, what does this mean? What about the party? What about Grandpa?" "It means," I said before Mr. Hendricks could reply, my calm voice seeming to fill the entire terrace, "that tonight, you are all here as my personal guests. And whether you stay until the end of the party depends entirely on your future behavior." Power had shifted from their hands to mine so abruptly and definitively that in the ensuing silence, you could hear their worldview collapsing. For years of condescending oblivion. For years of whispering behind our backs. For years of certainty in our fall and their superiority. All of it turned to dust right before their eyes as they realized in whose hands the real power now lay. "Well," Grandpa Edward said after a pause that seemed to last an eternity, "now that's what I call a plot twist." "Exactly," I agreed cheerfully. It's amazing how much you can miss when you're not paying attention to what's happening right under your nose. Jessica, Ethan leaned forward with the desperate focus of a man trying to defuse a bomb. Maybe we should discuss this in a more private setting? Family matters shouldn't be aired in public. Really? I tilted my head slightly, feigning consideration of this startling new idea. For the past 4 years, I haven't exactly felt like part of any family matters. So today is a perfect opportunity to change all that. Mr. Hendricks cleared his throat delicately, breaking the awkward silence. My apologies, Miss Jessica. Shall I inform the kitchen that you will be staying for the birthday dinner? This was the moment. The perfect scene for the perfect ending. I once again surveyed the table, taking in the picture, a mixture of humiliation, feverish calculation, and the slow, agonizing realization that their behavior over the past 4 years would have very specific and very expensive consequences. Actually, Mr. Hendricks, I only stopped by for a moment, to wish Grandpa Edward a happy birthday and say hello to the family. Unfortunately, I have other business meetings scheduled for tonight. Of course, Miss Jessica. Shall I escort you to your car? That won't be necessary, but thank you. I picked up my purse and rose elegantly, adjusting my dress with casual grace. Please, don't let me interrupt your celebration, I said, addressing the whole table. Stay as long as you like. Enjoy the evening. I had already turned to leave, but then I slowly turned back, as if I had just remembered one minor but important detail. It was the kind of pause that makes everyone at the table hold their breath, waiting for the final, decisive blow. Oh, and Mr. Hendricks, I said, addressing him but keeping my eyes fixed on my family. Please ensure that my family receives the highest standard of service tonight. And prepare a separate check for each of them. For everything. I want them to fully appreciate what they're paying for. Mr. Hendricks nodded with the gravity of a man receiving an order that was not to be questioned. Understood, Miss Jessica. Separate checks at the premium rate. Payment will be required before the guests leave the premises. With those words, I turned back to the table with that same smile I knew would send a shiver down their spines. Enjoy your evening. And happy birthday again, Grandpa. I took a step back, ready to leave, and gave them one last look. I sincerely hope this celebration is everything you all deserve. The silence that fell behind me was absolute, a vacuum that filled the space where their arrogance had just been. I walked through the main hall, and the crisp, measured click of my heels on the polished travertine was the only sound in this new world. Each step was like a period at the end of a very long, and very satisfying, sentence. I didn't need to look back. I already knew what was happening at that table. A circle of stunned faces, frozen in time. Their minds desperately trying to reconcile the reality they had lived in for the past 4 years with the one that had just crashed down upon them. And then, I knew, the second wave of realization would hit. The cold, slow horror that would grip them when the waiters brought the bills. Separate, itemized bills from one of the most prestigious and expensive establishments in Los Angeles. The moment when the taste of victory for me would become the bitter taste of reckoning for them. Mr. Hendricks discreetly followed me, staying a few paces behind until I reached the cool marble of the main reception desk. There, away from prying eyes, I took a business card from my purse and quickly wrote a few lines on the back. Here, I said, handing him the card. The instructions are simple. I saw his eyes quickly scan my handwriting. Every item on their order, from a glass of water to the most expensive dish, was to be billed at the maximum rate for non-members. Any attempt to reference an old family account or past privileges was to be met with a polite but firm refusal. And if anyone refused to pay, the staff was to follow the club's standard protocol for dealing with non-payers, a protocol that, as we both knew, ended with a very unpleasant conversation involving lawyers. When he finished reading, something very much like satisfaction flickered in his professionally impassive gaze. It will be done exactly as you've instructed, Miss Jessica. And one more thing, Mr. Hendricks, I added, already heading for the exit. I'll be monitoring the situation remotely through the security system. Make sure they know that. My departure was carefully timed. I drove just a few blocks away and parked at a quiet cafe with panoramic windows. From here, I had a perfect view of the club's main entrance and the terrace where the drama was unfolding. But the real director's console was in my hands. Thanks to a recent and very expensive upgrade, the entire nervous system of the Crestwood Valley Club was now an app on my phone. I brought up the feed from the camera aimed directly at their table. Thanks to new, discreet microphones, the audio was crystal clear. I had a front row seat to the performance they had staged for themselves. On the screen, my relatives were huddled together like conspirators whose plan had failed spectacularly. This is a catastrophe. Aunt Beatrice's voice trembled with panic. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? It means she's been playing us for fools. Olivia hissed, her shock rapidly turning to fury. How long has she been sitting on her millions? How long has she been laughing at us behind our backs? Enough hysterics, Grandpa Edward interrupted them with his authoritative, cold tone. The only question that matters now is how we are going to fix this. Fix it? We'll fix it. Uncle Arthur declared with the kind of self-assurance only people who sincerely believe there's no problem money can't solve possess. We're family. This is just a simple misunderstanding that got out of hand due to a lack of communication. A lack of communication, I repeated quietly, watching their panicked faces on the screen. What an elegant term for 4 years of complete, deliberate oblivion. A lack of communication? A familiar, perfectly calm voice cut through their panicked whispers. I zoomed in on my phone screen. My parents were approaching the table, unhurried and confident. They didn't rush, every step was filled with dignity. Their arrival instantly silenced everyone at the table and made them sit up straight. My mother, Catherine, wore a simple but impeccably tailored silk dress that cost more than most of the cars in the parking lot. She had a serene smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. She radiated that subtle glow of someone who knows the show they are watching has been a complete success. My father, Richard, walked beside her, relaxed and calm, a quiet observer whose strength lay in his imperturbability. Richard. Catherine. Grandpa Edward's voice rang with the desperate cheerfulness people use to make small talk in the middle of a crisis. What a pleasant surprise. We were just discussing our Jessica's outstanding achievements. Discussing? My mother repeated. Her voice was perfectly level, devoid of all emotion. But it was this very emptiness that was so deafening. It seemed as if that single question dropped the temperature on the terrace by several degrees, and all conversation at the neighboring table ceased. On my phone screen, a drama worthy of Hollywood's finest scenes was unfolding. The icy calm of my parents entering the terrace clashed with the frantic panic of my family, and the air seemed to crackle from the collision. And it was in that moment that I saw something click in Ethan's eyes. He stopped looking like a guilty schoolboy and transformed into a predator who had scented an opportunity. He realized that humiliation could be turned into triumph if one acted quickly and brazenly enough. He leaped to his feet, raising his glass with such exaggerated joy that it looked almost insane. To Jessica, he proclaimed to the entire terrace. To our Jessica. The owner of Crestwood Valley. Our Jessica, my father repeated quietly, and those 2 words held all the bitterness of 4 years of oblivion. But it was a signal for everyone else. Olivia, whose voice had been trembling with humiliation just a minute ago, now rang with mettle. She imperiously summoned a waiter. A bottle of Dom Perignon, the best vintage. We're celebrating a family success. I leaned back in my chair at the coffee shop, watching this with cold astonishment. They weren't just trying to save face. They were trying to steal my victory and make it their own. It was incredible. Uncle Arthur was already on his phone, his voice loud and full of pride as he spoke to someone on the other end. "Yes, we're at Crestwood Valley right now. You won't believe it, my niece just bought the place. The family is expanding." Aunt Beatrice, having forgotten about the spilled champagne, was already making a list of guests who needed to be urgently invited to witness their family triumph. Before my eyes, they weren't just rewriting history. They were burning the old version to the ground and building a new, shining myth on its ashes, with themselves now at the center, the closest relatives of the new owner of the most prestigious club in Los Angeles. On my phone screen, a true miracle of social alchemy was unfolding. In less than half an hour, their table, like a magnet, had attracted a dozen more people. I watched as new faces arrived, friends and business partners hastily summoned to this impromptu celebration, and as waiters pushed tables together, creating a new, noisy epicenter of power in the middle of the terrace. At the center of this whirlwind, like the queen of the ball, was Olivia. The woman who an hour ago tried to have me thrown out of my own establishment was now telling everyone who would listen, with a radiant smile. I always knew there was something special about Jessica. That backbone, that spark. We always believed in her. Uncle Arthur, having cornered some important-looking gentleman he had clearly been trying to impress for a long time, spoke loudly and earnestly, even in the toughest times. After that hit to Catherine's business, we never doubted her for a second. We knew she was the true continuation of our family. But the pinnacle of this theater of the absurd was Aunt Beatrice. She looked at a newly arrived friend with maternal tenderness and uttered words that sounded like a mockery of the very idea of family. "We've always been so close. We support each other, no matter what. That's our strength." Before my eyes, waiters brought out seafood towers worthy of a royal feast. Champagne corks flew into the air with such frequency it was like a salute to their hypocrisy. They weren't just lying. They were creating a new, convenient reality on the fly, one where they were not betrayers, but wise and patient mentors who had been invisibly supporting me on my path to success. It was a show, and each of them played their part flawlessly. For a moment, I even paused the feed to fully appreciate the level of their hypocrisy. The people who for 4 years had acted as if our family name was contagious were now pontificating about the strength of family ties. At the far end of this expanding table, I noticed my parents. They were silently observing this circus with a mixture of disgust and almost scientific curiosity. My mother caught my father's eye and gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. The verdict was clear: these people were hopeless. Meanwhile, the performance continued. Waiters, as if in slow motion, brought out bottle after bottle of Dom Perignon. They were followed by multi-tiered platters of rare cheeses and prosciutto, miniature tartlets with black caviar, and paper-thin slices of Japanese Wagyu carpaccio. With each new dish, each of their individual bills was quietly growing, turning into a small fortune. "To family," Olivia proclaimed, raising her glass with the confidence of someone who thought it was her idea. "And to our Jessica, who proved that blood is thicker than water." The irony was so thick it momentarily made my teeth ache. But all things come to an end. Their impromptu celebration lasted nearly 2 hours before Mr. Hendricks appeared on the scene. He approached the table with a leather folder in his hand and that serious, impenetrable expression that boded no good. "Pardon the interruption," he said with impeccable politeness, addressing the entire table. "I've been instructed to clarify the details regarding payment for this evening." The conversations at the table stopped so abruptly it was as if someone had flipped a switch. Olivia, her gaze slightly glazed over from expensive alcohol and an overinflated ego, slowly looked up at him. "Payment?" she repeated, as if the word was from a long-forgotten language. "Yes, ma'am. As Miss Jessica requested, all expenses at this table are being recorded on individual accounts. The kitchen asked to confirm whether you wish to continue service at the current level, or perhaps make some changes to your orders." That sentence acted like a bucket of ice water. Uncle Arthur, who just a moment ago was loudly boasting about our unbreakable family bond, suddenly fell silent and turned pale, as if he had just been shown the bill for the entire banquet. Separate accounts? Uncle Arthur's voice trembled as he uttered those two words. He desperately tried to cling to the old world where his surname still meant something. Listen, there must be some misunderstanding. We're Jessica's family. Surely there's a house account, some old arrangement. Mr. Hendricks maintained an impeccable composure that I was sure had been honed by years of dealing with men like my uncle. I'm afraid, sir, all previous arrangements were nullified at the time of the ownership transfer. Miss Jessica was very clear in her instructions for this evening. But this is outrageous. Aunt Beatrice interjected, her voice ringing with offended dignity. We are here to celebrate her success. This is a family celebration. Indeed, ma'am, Mr. Hendricks replied, without a hint of irony in his voice. And Miss Jessica wanted to ensure that her family received the very best tonight. He looked at his tablet with theatrical precision. Allow me to clarify. To date, your table has ordered 4 bottles of Dom Perignon 2012 vintage at $450 per bottle. 2 bottles of Screaming Eagle Cabernet Sauvignon at $900 each. A platter of Wagyu beef carpaccio for $600. Ostra caviar tartlets for $750. Plus a private terrace service fee of $300 per hour. The silence that hung over the table after this recitation was deafening. I watched on my phone screen as the cold math slowly but surely penetrated their drunken euphoria. I did a quick calculation in my head. Almost $6,000. And the evening was just getting started. This seems a bit inappropriate, Grandpa Edward finally said, his usually authoritative voice sounding quiet and uncertain. The foundation of his world had cracked. These are our standard rates for non-member guests, sir, Mr. Hendricks replied with the same flawless calm. Miss Jessica specifically requested that her family want for nothing tonight. This is robbery. Olivia exclaimed, her festive mood vanished without a trace. We are not paying these prices. This is absurd. We're family. I understand your frustration, ma'am, Mr. Hendricks nodded. Would you like me to contact Miss Jessica and clarify this matter? Yes. Uncle Arthur breathed out desperately. Yes, call her immediately. On my phone, I watched this performance with cold satisfaction. Mr. Hendricks took out his work phone with theatrical slowness. He dialed a number, brought the phone to his ear, and froze. 10 tense seconds passed during which it seemed no one at the table even breathed. Then, with an expression of professional regret, he lowered the phone. I'm afraid Miss Jessica is unavailable at the moment. May I take a message? Try again. Olivia demanded, panic now ringing in her voice. This ritual was repeated 3 more times. With each failed call, the tension at the table mounted, becoming almost unbearable. At the far end of the table, my parents watched the scene with barely concealed amusement. They knew exactly what was happening. And then the exodus began. The friends and acquaintances they had so hastily summoned suddenly began to remember urgent appointments. One's child was suddenly sick. Another had an early business meeting he had completely forgotten about. Nothing cools the fervor of a party like the prospect of splitting a $6,000 bill that appeared out of nowhere. In a matter of minutes, their grand party had shrunk back to its original cast. They were left alone, trapped at a table laden with expensive dishes, with a growing bill and shattered illusions. This is ridiculous, Uncle Arthur growled, trying to regain control. He snapped his fingers imperiously at a waiter. Listen, put everything on the old Henderson family account. We'll sort it out later. I'm afraid that account no longer exists, sir, Mr. Hendricks replied, his politeness sharper than any dagger. As I mentioned, all previous agreements have been terminated. But this is an insult. Olivia shrieked, her face contorted with rage. This is how you treat common visitors, not family. Perhaps that's because, my father said quietly, his calm voice cutting through her screech, for the last 4 years, you've treated Jessica like a common stranger. That phrase, like a stone thrown into a still lake, sent ripples of indignation. Aunt Beatrice shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly behind her. We have been members of this club for decades. We have a name, a reputation. You can't treat us as if we're just people who have to pay for what they order, my mother finished for her, speaking to my father but loud enough for the whole table to hear. And there it was. The core of their outrage. It wasn't about the money. It was about being treated like everyone else. They had been stripped of the privilege they considered their birthright. I demand to see the manager immediately. Olivia declared, her hands on her hips. I am the manager, ma'am, Mr. Hendricks replied evenly. But if you wish to speak directly to the owner, I can try contacting Miss Jessica again. Yes. Call her. Now. On my phone, I saw Olivia frantically grab her smartphone. Her fingers flew across the screen. In that same second, my own phone vibrated with an incoming call. I declined it without taking my eyes off her face, where panic was giving way to desperation. Then Uncle Arthur called. I declined his call too. My phone buzzed incessantly, vibrating with their collective, rising panic. It was the sweetest music I had heard in 4 years. The final scene was playing out on my phone screen. My phone was buzzing nonstop with their collective attempts to reach me, but to them, I was unreachable. Their invited friends, sensing the awkwardness of the moment, had long since departed, leaving them alone with a growing bill and a harsh reality. We are not paying these bills. Uncle Arthur announced loudly, trying to regain control of the situation. This is a simple misunderstanding. Mr. Hendricks nodded discreetly. I understand your position, sir. However, according to the establishment's policy, an unpaid bill requires standard settlement procedures. You'll be hearing from our lawyers. Aunt Beatrice interjected. Of course, ma'am, Mr. Hendricks replied. Your comments will be noted in the official report of this evening's events. The word report had a sobering effect on them. It was one thing to argue, and quite another to have an official record of your behavior at a club where reputation is everything. This is outrageous. We are family here. Uncle Arthur persisted, his voice beginning to attract the attention of other patrons. Actually, sir, Mr. Hendricks corrected him politely, you are here as guests. And guests are expected to adhere to the establishment's rules. That was the final word. And then, through the rising murmur, a quiet but firm voice spoke. Grandpa Edward slowly stood up. That's enough embarrassment, he said. There was no anger in his voice, only a cold, bitter weariness. He looked at his family with clear disappointment. We created this awkward situation ourselves. And we will exit it with dignity. He took out his checkbook. Before the eyes of the entire club, the patriarch of the defeated family silently wrote a check. It was a check that cost them far more than just money. It cost them their sense of superiority. He wrote the check in silence, the sharp, confident stroke of his pen the last sound of the evening. He carefully tore it out and placed it on the tray Mr. Hendricks held with an impassive face. I believe this covers all expenses, he said, his voice devoid of emotion, a mere statement of fact. As his subdued and bewildered family began to rise slowly, ready for a silent retreat, Grandpa Edward did something astonishing. He paused at the very edge of the terrace, away from the others, and looked up, his gaze fixed precisely on the small, barely noticeable security camera above the entrance. He was looking directly at me. He knew. Jessica, he said clearly, his voice calm but full of authority, you taught us a lesson. We deserved it. When you're ready to talk like adults about how to move forward, you know where to find me." He left without waiting for an answer, leaving behind a family that I knew would never be the same. But the performance wasn't over. In the parking lot, while the others were still whispering about the injustice and the enormous bill, he stopped abruptly and turned to them. "Let me make something clear, since you don't seem to get it." His voice was quiet but cut like a razor. "This is her club. We showed up here uninvited to celebrate my birthday, from which we excluded her. She had every right to throw us out that very second. Instead, she allowed us to stay and experience firsthand what it felt like to be in our shoes for the past 4 years. If you are incapable of seeing the bitter but just retribution in that, then you have understood absolutely nothing." A few hours later, I was sitting on the sun-drenched terrace at my parents' house. For the first time in 4 long years, the silence between us wasn't heavy and oppressive, but light and peaceful. The weight that had been pressing down on our family had finally lifted. "So," my father said, a twinkle in his eye, "how does it feel to be the owner of the establishment where our family just received the most expensive lesson in humility of their lives?" "Profitable," I replied. And all 3 of us laughed, the real, genuine laughter that comes when justice has finally been served. "Your grandfather called," my mother said softly after we had calmed down. "He wants to invite you to lunch. Just the 2 of you." I thought for a moment, watching a hummingbird flit among the flowers in their garden. Grandpa Edward. He was the only one who had truly understood what happened today. The only one who didn't look for someone to blame but accepted responsibility. "Did he say where he wants to meet?" "At Crestwood Valley," my mother replied, a warm smile on her lips. "He said he'd like to see the changes you've made. And also, he wants to apply for membership." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "An application?" "He was very insistent," my mother added. "He said he wants to go through the entire process, just like any other candidate. No special treatment. No family privileges. He said he wants to earn his place. On the new terms." That gesture told me more than any words could. It wasn't an apology. It was an acknowledgement. Grandpa Edward, a man who had operated from a position of power and entitlement his entire life, was for the first time willing to ask, not demand. He didn't just want his club membership back, he wanted to earn his place back in my life, on my terms. My phone had finally gone silent. The vibration that had been incessant for hours had stopped. I scrolled through the barrage of messages that had inundated me. It was a full palette of human reactions to a loss of control. There was the predictable chorus of outrage. Uncle Arthur wrote about a violation of family values. Olivia, about how I had humiliated them in front of the whole city. But among the noise, there were other voices. A message from Ethan was short and surprisingly honest. "We deserved that. I was wrong. Sometime, if you're up for it, I'd love to congratulate you on your success for real." And then came a message from Aunt Beatrice, clearly written after the conversation in the parking lot. "Your grandfather made us see what we've been hiding from for 4 years. We were wrong. About everything. Is there any chance we could ever try to start over?" I wasn't ready to answer yet. Some bridges could be rebuilt, but others had been burned to the ground. Only time would tell which ones were still crossable. "You know what's the most interesting thing about all this?" I said, turning to my parents, who sat silently beside me. "It was never about the money. Or even the club. It was about the assumption. For 4 years, they lived with the absolute certainty that they could just write us out of their lives and then, when it became convenient, write us back in." "And now?" my father asked quietly. "And now," I replied, looking at the setting sun, "they've learned that a relationship isn't a bank account you can freeze and unfreeze at will. You can't ignore people in a storm and then expect them to greet you with a smile when the sun comes out again." The evening light bathed my parents' terrace in gold, and long shadows crept slowly across the garden. Tomorrow, work would begin again, meetings, contracts, and the management of my new, complex investment. I knew I would approve Grandpa Edward's application. But right now, in this quiet harbor, next to the people whose love never depended on my financial status, I felt something more than just triumph. It was peace. A deep, well-earned sense of peace that comes when you've finally put everything in its rightful place. This whole story wasn't about revenge. Or even money. It was about boundaries. About the fact that in any area of life, be it business, friendship, or family, you set the rules for how you are to be treated. Knowing your worth isn't arrogance. It's a prerequisite for not letting others devalue you. Just then, my phone vibrated softly one last time. The final message of the day. From Mr. Hendricks. Miss Jessica, allow me to report that the events of this evening have become the main topic of discussion among the staff. It is an honor for our entire team to work for someone who values justice over family convention. We look forward to building something truly special here under your leadership. That message was the final touch. If this story resonated with you, if you know what it feels like to have to stand up for yourself, let me know with a like and a subscribe. Remember, you teach people how to treat you. And sometimes, the most effective lessons come in the form of a very detailed bill.